Michigan Technological. Now that's in Upper Michigan, isn't it, Jim?
That is correct. We're in the Upper Peninsula.
That's what I thought, you were in the Upper Peninsula. Well, I am in Chicago, so that gives you some just across the lake.
Yep.
Let's see. We do have 4 speakers here. Ben is not here, and Agnos is not here. But would you like to start now and do your 30 minutes?
I will.
That way we'll be on time.
Yeah. Let me get my slides up here. I'm assuming I run from here. Is that?
Yes. Okay. You should have capability to run the slides.
Can everybody see them?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So yes, thank you for the opportunity. Duanati and everyone who's attending. So I'm Jim Baker, Associate Vice President for Research at Michigan Technological University with responsibility for technology commercialization, which has a substantial startup business development component. Within the last year, I became the managing director of an emerging pre-seed fund, the Michigan Outdoor Innovation Fund, focused on companies taking technologies associated with outdoor experiences towards the market. So we have a $3, soon to be $5 million fund. We've made investments in about 11 companies over the last 8 months, and so having a lot of fun helping those companies move forward. So experience on the academic side of commercialization and on the practical side of commercialization. And I want to talk today about what I characterize as a systems engineering approach to thinking about moving from a continuum of invention to innovation and to investability. To set the stage for that, the definitions, so innovation in particular has all sorts of definitions depending on the context of the analysis. So I will put forth, for the purpose of this conversation and the application of systems engineering, we start with an invention, which is a novel approach to solving a problem, a clever idea to solve a problem, and in some senses, I'll even say, could be practical or could be even a Rube Goldberg type invention. So it solves a problem in a new way, but maybe or maybe not commercializable. The bridge in the context of this conversation from invention to innovation is the defined end user community who has a willingness and ability to pay. And in the lean startup methodology terminology, product market fit. We have a value proposition that some quote unquote technology or some novel, whether it's a business practice or technology, literal technology, but some need that is addressed and that provides a value proposition for which end users both have the willingness and the ability to pay. That is a commercial product. And investability takes another step on that, where there's enough customers and there's enough capital to be made in the sales market to justify risk capital from private markets. So there are all sorts of types of investments. But when I say private markets, I mean private institutional investors, aka venture capital. So there's lots of forms of investment, and I'll go into some of the continuum investment. But when I say investability in the context of this conversation, it means institutional investors, those looking for substantial return on investment, for taking a risk premium on a company or an initiative that has a high level of risk. So I use often the light bulb as a case study, and I have animations in this slide as I go through it, kind of a step by step. But for this conversation today, I'll just give the punchline is that as we move from the continuum of invention to innovation to investment and scalability, the gentleman on the far right is who most people tend to identify as the quote unquote inventor of the light bulb, right? The image of innovation is a light bulb. The logo for Husky Innovate, which is our campus program, right on the bottom right of my slides, shows the light bulb as, kind of the cornerstone of innovation. Yet the path to realization of the light bulb as a commercial product was much longer and much more storied than the average population understands. The invention of incandescence was a gentleman named Sir Humphrey Davy. This was before Thomas Edison was even born. He was the first person to do the experiment of a resistive filament that provided illumination and heat. There was also then there became a series of what turns into about 32 individuals who are throughout the patent literature prior to Edison, led by Frederick de Moyan, who's the picture next in the invention. So the discovery was Sir Humphrey Davy. Many years later, the first patent to a particular design of a light bulb was Frederick de Moyan. And then even as we move towards innovation, the gentleman third from the left is Joseph Swan, and he was the first to sell light bulbs. So Edison wasn't the first to discover incandescence. He wasn't the first to patent any particular light bulb design. He wasn't even the first to sell a light bulb. But why do we think of him as why do many think of him as, I mean, that's a whole conversation in and of itself. And if you want to dig into kind of patent nerd issues, which I tend to do at times, there's a whole question about, what is the invention, but the conventional wisdom is Edison scaled access to the light bulb. And he did that in large part through the creation of centralized power generation and distribution. So he did light bulb power generation, power distribution, and that starts getting towards the systems engineering and systems level thinking about how to bring technologies to the marketplace. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of teams to move down that continuum. There's a note here in the middle that says Etta Swan Electric, and this is, I do a lot of intellectual property presentations and teach an intellectual property course. And one of the points there is that Edison and Swan both had very strong patents. In fact, they were so strong that they ultimately were more or less forced by the courts to form a joint venture at a Swan Electric company that they could have spent the rest of their careers battling in the patent courts and stopping each other from being successful, or they could have joined forces. They weren't friendly with each other. They didn't enjoy the collaboration, but the collaboration was a legal necessity because of the strength of both of their patents. So it's about execution as much as it is about proprietary protection. So we have this long-tailed process from invention to innovation to investment and scalability. The next slide is a graph that anybody in the innovation space, I'm sure, is well aware of, the quote-unquote valley of death. And so I've broken out the invention, innovation, and investability, again, in both of those terms in this particular context, along that continuum. But also note a couple elements here. One, and we'll draw those out a little bit as we go along, but it's not a straightforward curve. The curve of every experience down this journey from invention to innovation to investability has its own shape, and it's very rarely simply parabolic or simply 45-degree V. It's very dynamic. Also, as I'll talk about through the rest of this presentation, it's not as simple as the investment continuum and the risk profile of the opportunity. Investability is a much, much deeper issue, and it relates to a number of factors well beyond this simple continuum that many people are at least conscious of, and we talk about it in terms of the team, from the founder to the scaling person. We talk about many dimensions of it, and I'll propose throughout this presentation that a systems engineering approach is very helpful in getting through this continuum. And it's not just simply a matter of time, a matter of straightforward development. It's not a linear process. So as we think about that quote-unquote valley of death, on the slide that I showed, in particular, in many slides that you see that look at this issue in detail, you see that the journey from the left side of the valley to the bottom of the valley is very often longer in terms of time than the climb up the other side. The climb up the other side is steeper, but faster and less resource constrained. Along that journey through this valley, down into the bottom of the valley and up the other side, there are surprises around every corner. All right, anybody who's ever been part of a startup or an established company realizes that, as well as, right, anyone who has kids or has taken a trip to the grocery store or anything in life, there are surprises. In order to survive this journey, particularly the journey down to the bottom of the valley of death before the resource curve starts turning, prioritization is essential to survival. Resources are more constrained on the way down, and then as you get to the bottom, resources start showing up. You start turning the corner towards investability. And if you practice a systems engineering approach, you can increase the chances of survival. And this has been informed by over 30 years of commercialization projects that I've been involved in, and in reflecting on the projects that went well, the projects that didn't go well. A lot of them follow this systems engineering approach, at least casually. And another way to illustrate that journey, right? So startups often start out with this plan, easily definable goal, slight uphill incline, but reality then comes and there's boulders in the way. You need a bridge, you need a boat, you need a raincoat. And so you need resources that you didn't start the journey with as you move along. And while this is showing an upward journey, this is generally the journey to the bottom. I mean, the surprises continue, but the surprises are fatal on the path to the bottom of the valley before the resources start becoming more available. So for those who are unfamiliar with the systems engineering concept, there's a number of pioneers in the systems engineering field, but the United States National Aeronautics and Space Administration is one of them, and they really focus on systems engineering as a way to increase reduce the likelihood of a failed mission. And so they define it as this methodical, multidisciplinary approach to design, realization, management, operation, and retirement of a system. So we think about all of those steps from design to retirement, and what are the disciplines that need to be involved? What are the expertises that need to be involved? What are the resources that need to be leveraged as we move through this mission? It's a fairly complicated chart, and I don't expect everyone to read it, but they break this down into steps from pre-formulation of the mission to formulation of the mission to implementation of the mission. And they think about ideas about how are we going to achieve this mission, and they start reducing the number of ideas and increasing the level of execution around those ideas, and then move into full execution. And so we'll dig into this in an innovation context later, but this is how NASA ensures they have successful missions, right? They start with open-minded thinking about what are we trying to accomplish and how might we accomplish it. Then they start reducing the number of variables down to at the end where they eliminate the number of variables. This helps reduce risk as things move along. Another way to look at this that NASA uses is that we have this timeline from concept to operation and disposal. And a particular note is that the two curves on this graph are not straight lines. So the curve on the top indicates that every decision in the process has an incrementally higher impact on overall life cycle costs. So those decisions must need to be made very carefully. And then the percent completed is slower, right? So we are committing life cycle costs consciously or unconsciously with every decision early in the process. And we are very slow to move through the process towards completion of overall cost expended as we move along that timeline. And the space in the middle of these two curves shows that the cost to change design really is substantial as you move down the continuum. And in the startup context, the consequences of making bad decisions and the cost of reversing those decisions is substantial. So early stage decisions need to be made fast and learned from fast. Later stage decisions need to be highly informed and stuck with because the cost of changing is very high. So a NASA mission and a startup really follow similar trends in terms of the overall cost of decision making, if you will, as things move along. So if we pivot the NASA definition of systems engineering to an innovation context, I propose that it's this still methodical, multidisciplinary approach, but it focuses around the prioritization of the resources, primarily time, the effort of the founders and their partners, and capital, their own capital, or ultimately the investment capital. And then we're going to apply those resources to discovery, development, launch, and then scaling, if we're getting to investability as I've defined it, institutional capital, of a product or service within an organization, often a startup, but could be an established company that licenses the technology, for example, that launches and sustains the offering. So there is the offering, the product or service, and then there's the entity that is providing that offering, a startup or an established company that licenses the technology. But in either case, it is the process of thoughtfully and methodically prioritizing the expenditure of resources through the continuum from discovery to development to launch and scaling. So as we look down this continuum, particularly starting from an early stage commercialization project, what are the system level issues that we need to think about? We need to start with market de-risking. That is there an economic opportunity here? What do the customers really want? Does it align with what I have? Does it even align with what they're telling me? I need to study what the customers really want, right? There's a famous Henry Ford quote, if I had asked the customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So how do we understand what are the gaps in the market? What are they actually able and willing to pay? We see this a lot in our early stage market studying information, that people will express interest in a product, and then when you show them the PO, then that interest turns into, well, I was curious about it, but I really wasn't that interested in it. Also, it's important to think about from a market standpoint, how do your customers want to get it? Is it a virtual offering? Is it a physical offering? If it's a physical offering, do they want to buy it online? Do they want to buy it in a shelf? What are the service requirements? What are the installation requirements? What are all of the elements around what it's going to take to get this used by a customer? And then always we need to think about, back to the systems engineering approach, what are we overlooking? What requirements are we not understanding from a market standpoint? We move that into, so after we have satisfied ourselves that there are customers that are willing and able to pay, or likely customers that are willing and able to pay, and we are on a path to providing something that they are willing and able to pay for, does our technology align with the customer's use case? And if not, what do we need to do to change that? Can we do this at a saleable price, at the price that they're willing to pay and able to pay? What's the manufacturability assessment? What's the supply chain look like? What are the service delivery platforms? Again, what are we overlooking? What are we not considered in the process? Systems level, systems engineering level thinking. In the business ecosystem, what are the regulatory considerations? What are the certifications, either desirable or necessary? Are there positive or negative stigmas associated with what I'm trying to do? Who are my partners? Who are my competitors? And who are my co-opeters, right? I may be partnering with an entity that also is a competitor, but we may have an aligned interest. And so how do I leverage the efforts of others? And how do I be aware of those that are seeking for me, not necessarily seeking for me to fail, but seeking to succeed at best in spite of me, if not to my detriment. And once again, systems engineering approach, what are we overlooking? As we look at the dynamics of the systems level thinking, we think about what are the skill set requirements? And this is a common phenomenon in the startup space, as well as we move down the business continuum. We talk about the skills of a founder versus the skill of the sustainability person versus the skills of the growth CEO. And as we think about that, that's really, we're looking for explorers who want to go into territory that's never been seen before. We're looking for pioneers that want to be the first to move into those areas. And then we're looking for settlers, those that want to grow and build communities in those spaces, right? So we need all of those skill sets along our journey. But at settlement mode, if we have someone who's an explorer, who's always out running around looking for things, that's not very healthy. And at the explorer stage, if we have settlers who are looking to be in place, that's also not very healthy. So we need to think about, as we move down the continuum from invention to innovation to investability, what are the skill sets we need on the team? How do decision-making processes change, right? At the early stage, we're very fast decisions, very experimental decisions. There's low cost change. How do we move fast and learn fast, fail fast in the startup vernacular? And then we start becoming more measured and more informed, right? In the fast and experimental phase, that's why we're experimental. We don't have the information. We make these decisions quickly. Then as we have more information, we start to be more measured. And then at the end of the life cycle, we become deliberate and highly informed. Some might say bureaucratic, right? Bureaucracies exist for a reason, because the institutions that are around them have mass. Corporations have bureaucracies, and academic institutions, of course, have bureaucracies. The implications of resource availability and resource scarcity change as we go through this continuum. So early, we have very scarce resources, and missing something can be fatal, and often is fatal. As we get to the bottom of the valley of death, if you will, and resources start to grow, it's now uncomfortable and it's hard, but it's not fatal as often as it is when we're coming down the continuum on the valley of death. And when we achieve scaling, so resources are always limited, and those limitations become inconveniences, but they are rarely fatal, and even rarely uncomfortable. So again, as we think about the systems engineering approach to managing the team, managing the resources, managing the capital requirements, we want to be aware that these things are changing as we move from concept of a mission to closure of the mission. And so go back to this just as a reminder, right, that the life cycle costs don't scale linearly, and the costs expended, the resources required to be successful, also don't scale linearly. So a systems engineering approach. As we think about how to apply the model to innovation, we think about the stages on the left here, from invention to innovation to investability, and the domains of technology, team, and capital. I'm not going to spend the time to go through all these, but you see we move from proof of concept to establish sales and growing sales. We move from researchers leading the team and dominating the team to researchers being combined with commercialization expertise, followed by solely execution expertise. We start with public resources because the risk is higher than any responsible capitalist would ever take. We move into friendly capital founders, friends, and family, as well as angel investors who are willing to take high risks, and because they believe in the mission, they believe in what is going to happen. And they also are seeking a return on investment, but they are taking a very high level of risk. And then we move down towards, you get towards the seed level, Series A, B, C, and then on to exit. It's purely a financial investment decision, but there's a passion component. The explorers are passionate. The pioneers are passionate. The settlers are just looking for a place to live. So if we think about, the overall process, and particularly the early stages, which are very sensitive from a resource scarcity standpoint, we need to be aware that there's a high level of dynamic interchange as we move towards investability. And there are external factors that are resource limitations as information limitations. So we can only do so much about those. The things that we can control are team selection and development. How do we have the right team at the right time based on our stage in the process? And then how do we react to those conditions as they present themselves? We're going to have a plan. That plan's going to be wrong. How do we deal with resource allocations as things change? Again, those can be fatal early in the process, early in the mission, If we're wrong with the decisions we make early in the mission, they can turn into fatality late in the mission. And we need to think about it through the continuum of the mission in a systems engineering context. So for those of you that are familiar with systems engineering, this may seem like common sense. I've had a couple conversations with some aerospace colleagues that do a lot of systems engineering, and they say that this is very common in the mission space. I do not find it very common in the innovation space, and I think it really helps illustrate how we need the early stage CEO, the late stage CEO. How do we organize the capital sources? How do we organize the other resources to increase the probability for success? And with that, I think from the last session, it sounded like they were taking questions at the end, but I'll defer to the moderator.
Well, I'll tell you, there is not a session at the end for a roundtable.
Oh,
the previous session had a roundtable.
Okay.
So in this case, I think we will take the questions at the end. I was very impressed by what you were saying, and I love the idea that when you said whatever your plans are, they're going to be wrong. And I was thinking how along the road to thriving, how many times consumers use things differently than the original innovators thought they'd use them, because they have a mind of their own, that things sort of are used in very, very different ways. And you have to really be flexible and adaptable to the changing situations. And I think this is going to be a real challenge for AI.
Mm-hmm. Yes. How do we not overpredict? Yes. Right.
Yes. This is one of the things that I'm looking at, because I was thinking you used the light bulb example, but there are so many others. I was thinking that even the whole idea of computers. Mm-hmm. I'm old enough to remember when we introduced computers into the curriculum of universities. And where in many cases it was first introduced was, of course, in statistics. You could do calculations on the computer. And then I was dean of the College of Business at the time, and we put it in accounting because it was thought that the accountants were the ones most likely to use a computer. So computer science was
right.
That's where I hired computer people. Put in the accountant.
Yeah.
And I was relating that to what you were saying as you were going along. What do you see as the future with AI going along, the challenges they're going to face?
Yeah, I think so. The future is inherently unpredictable, right? And I think AI accelerates our ability to assimilate the information that is available to us. But the information that is available to us is always incomplete. So our ability to make less informed decisions is going to move faster with AI, right? We will have the ability, the computer can manipulate information and reach and provide an assimilation of that information faster than we will ever be able to. But it still is not going to replace that. It is built upon the data that it has, and judgment will always be required. So I think it'll speed up the decision-making process. It'll reduce the risk of failure, and I think that's going to support businesses who embrace it and leverage it. But those who think it gives them the quote-unquote right answer are going to struggle, and those who use it for the information that it provides are going to accelerate.
That's excellent insight. Does anyone who's here have a question? If so, would you either raise your hand or unmute yourself? I don't want to. Hanani, did you have any questions?
No questions. Our conference protocol is no question. Only open discussion, 15 minutes between the presenter. But I cannot stop the people when they say, give questions. We need just only open discussion between the presenter. We didn't take Q&A because we're using in our protocol using AI platform, Hoover, and the Hoover, it's accessing all the speaker and all the attendee together to making chat chatting and to have the discussions and changing the card. Based on that, I remove from my protocol Q&A, only open discussion between the speaker about their opinion, about the future recommendation. This is the reason why we leave only 15 minutes.
That's fine. That's fine.
I think you can start with the second presenter.
Yes, Malcolm Perry, I see, is here. He's muted himself. I think he's going to be here, and he will be our second presenter.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but I cannot see you.
I'm unsure how to make it so that you can see me. However, what I have arranged is to have can I say, I was going to use Dr. Hernadi to change the slides, but can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
And can you see a slide?
Yes, I can see the slide.
Okay, in which case I shall just ask Dr. Hernadi to make the change for me. Just to put some context to this, I'm humbled by what I've heard over the few days about AI, and it's hugely impressive, and I'm pleased to be part of this. So when I was a teenager, the American singer Bob Dylan released a song that reflected a mood of change in society at many levels. In 1984, Steve Jobs unveiled the Macintosh computer, and legend has it that he referred back to this song, and the line said, "Don't speak too soon, the wheel is still spinning." And in 1984, this spin was added. Impetus certainly in the UK, when the telecoms industry was liberalized, and entrepreneurs took advantage of this sea change because they were allowed to hang devices on the lines, and that began to change the world to a point that's unimaginable today. But on reflection, there were signs that some of the companies that are recruited to the research park were very significant in their early works. Let me just get this to do the one thing. Sorry, I've not very
We see
clever.
the new slide.
I'm not the next slide, but unfortunately I would like to see what I'm saying. So I'm just going to do something different here.
Professor, if you want us to present from our side, no problem.
Okay.
It's better for you.
Well, okay, I've sorted the problem now.
Okay,
so
good.
on my second slide, which is here, one of the companies was developing neural networks for the banking sector for fraud detection. And bearing in mind this was back in 1986, and there was another company that joined us involved in cybernetics that grew to become a leading-edge cybersecurity organization. And a third example was a company that was involved in computer-controlled drug discovery programs for the pharmaceutical sector. And all were bought out with exits worth many millions. And then there's a final example of something interesting that happened. I recruited a guy called Peter Molyneux when he founded his first company, which was called Bullfrog, and it was involved in computer games, which is a sector that I think has been significant and important in influencing the tech behind AI. And coincidentally, Demis Hassabis worked for Bullfrog before he went on to launch DeepMind. And one of the common features of all these people was their urge to solve commercial problems rather than take their ideas to the marketplace. And I emphasize entrepreneurs because the private sector investment in this tech has been orders of magnitude higher than government investment over the last 30 years. And looking back at the level of government investment, certainly in the UK, it's been dictated by policy constraints, such as there was the Lighthill report in 1973 in the UK that stated AI was an unimportant technology, so government funding was cut. And in the early days in the US, DARPA, but this next slide, please. Hello? Next slide. That's the one. Thanks. No, not that one. That one. I shall remember to say slide. So the Lighthill report, as I mentioned, suggested cuts. And in the early days in the US, DARPA slowed the investment because they found the solution that the team was seeking did not match the question they were trying to address. So when the potential of AI was realized by Geoffrey Hinton's equations at Edinburgh University, not all countries were ready to capitalize on this. Next slide, please. Thank you. So entrepreneurs won the day, and many large traditional corporations were left behind in terms of control and utilization. And these big corporations are now having to catch up and try to integrate their disparate systems to retain their position in the market and provide significant markets for more fleet-footed consultancies that are working to integrate their systems. And out of those AI-focused companies has come the so-called Magnificent Seven that now dominate the market and have become so influential in our daily lives at many levels, as we have heard over the last few days. And as we saw from Christopher Harrison on Tuesday from WIPO, that these companies hold many of the patents that may give them power to dictate their terms in particular markets, such as the pharma sector. Next slide, please. At one level of innovation, these entrepreneurs are using the technology to drive waves of creative disruption, such as its use in machine learning to drive autonomous vehicles, as well as sectors such as healthcare and medicine, where it has many applications from diagnostics, drug development, and robotic surgery. Next slide, please. And at another level, this technology has enabled what has been described as innovation through entrepreneurial discovery, as codified by the Austrian economist Kirchner, where it is used to analyze existing markets for wider applications or new but related markets. And it seems to me that many entrepreneurs and big corporations are using it for this particular kind of a discovery. And this idea of entrepreneurial discovery has been put forward as a policy tool by the European Union to support regional economic development by searching and capitalizing on existing clusters of activity. Next slide, please. Which reflects what has been described as innovation districts that combine economic assets, such as small and large institutions, companies of different sizes, and public and private organizations that support business development, and have in place sources of R&D with access to innovation cultivators, such as business incubators, accelerators, and co-working spaces, where they provide support and advice for team building, raising finance through investor clubs, while having access to experience management, all of which help to enable both entrepreneurial discovery and creative destruction, as well as offering a range of physical assets like housing to bring families in and then build social networks and business networks that can drive forward the development of a technology. Next slide, please. As a foundation to this, it's now common in universities to provide programs that can support the development of relevant university teaching and research activities from ideas to market. These typically provide the whole range of advice and help with finance from student enterprise right up to full scale up. And they're usually supported by university innovation offices and external teams, as well as investor clubs to guide progress through the normal milestones and against which they're measured. And that deals with finance, operation, market, and customer acquisition as examples are common. However, in discussion with colleagues across the UK Science Park Association, of which we have nearly 120 members in our organisation, there are a number of questions being raised about improving the impact of these kinds of programs. Next slide, please. And this prompted me to discuss the question of typical academic skill sets and values in the context of the innovation process. So what drives academics? This list is an attempt to answer the question, and dipping into these, my view is they usually have a profound interest in increasing the depth of knowledge of subject and their subject, and commonly wanting to do this in order to contribute to the common good. They value teaching and mentoring, as well as communicating the results. Funding is often from the public purse, so the profit motive is not the strongest driver. And in many institutions, they're obliged to have experimental work reviewed by ethics committee, which means the net is cast widely to gather views about what they're doing. And on personal terms, relinquishing a university position to become an entrepreneur is not usually seen as an attractive career move. And finally, a very important factor is an academic status that traditionally is measured by publication and citation rates, not by the size of their wallet or the quality of their car. This is embedded in the phrase I recall from being an academic many years ago, is publish or perish. Next slide, please. But in contrast, the entrepreneur skills set out usually are founded on a market value of an idea. That's really what drives most entrepreneurs. And what I've learned over the years from those that have been successful is that they have a realistic concept in their mind and can convey this realism to investors and ultimately customers, so satisfying a genuine need. To be believable, they need to have domain experience, whether gained during education, training, or pure exposure to the market, which gives off an air of understanding, adaptability, and resilience that helps build customer interest and encourage them to buy. And all this needs to be wrapped up and delivered through emotional intelligence that gives the customer the confidence to buy. Just to say building a business is not a frivolous business, as we all know. It's a serious business with many things at stake. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, domain experience is critical in helping to define a potential customer group and gain their confidence. And to do this needs measured and honest answers to the kind of questions in this list, so they can either attract investment, or if self-funded, then have complete confidence in the answers. So it's about problems that a product or service solves. And who has these problems? What is the value of the solution to that customer? How the solution will be delivered to the customer? And then how much money will it take to create and provide the solution? And how much money will it make for my company and its investors? And it seems that using AI can truncate the process of identifying answers. But beware of the old adage, rubbish in, rubbish out. Next slide, please. So when comparing in a economic sense, what is success in the academic and commercial streams? I see very different measures, and associated with these, there's not a lot to prevent crossover, but it makes it more of a challenge to move from one community to the other. However, to help break down these values, there may be some strategic opportunities that can bring them closer together with more positive outcome. One idea is to include intervals of group work in research or taught in a taught degree, as this helps to teach leadership and teamwork. So there is, which is more important in a commercial environment. Although I would predict that there may be challenges in resolving issues such as original work, data ownership, and patents as examples. And finally, the largest problem is related to publication rates, IP ownership, and fast-moving fields such as AI. How does this fit with 3-year doctoral research qualifications, which are much too long in the context of the movement of AI, which may need to be reviewed? Next slide, please. And in terms of the innovation districts, new dimensions might include business labs on campus, which may mean instead of moving the academic off the campus, what might be more useful, excuse me, is to bring entrepreneurs onto the campus and become part of the academic department. But I'm not sure how to do this other than creating company offices on campus and labs on the campus itself, although there are probably barriers that need to be removed to achieve this, and these include IP issues, restructuring the format of research degrees, and the systems of rewards. And last but not least, restructuring legal agreements concerning research outputs to cover the academic need to publish while meeting the need for protecting priority knowledge. And for the last two slides, new slide, please. At university level, at my University of Surrey, we have a long-standing program titled People-Centered AI. It's been in existence for 30 years. And what the university has done is link the teams in the Centre for Vision, Speech and Signal Processing, which is the lead in AI, into the expertise in the departments across a range of from health, nutrition, right through to chemical engineering, with the intention of driving up the productivity of the research outputs in terms of academic and social and individual value. And if the results have commercial potential in developing and pushing them up the value chain, then obviously there's an opportunity for academics to invite business partners in and to extend the process. And to an extent, the presentation by Katrina Hedbeck this morning added much to that debate. It was very impressive. And in terms of the student experience, those that take a placement year in a commercial or industrial environment, this can help ground the students in valuable domain experience. So I hope that was of interest and struck a chord with you. For me, it's being a pleasure. And sorry, it's the last slide, please. And I apologize for my total incompetence with technology. But hey ho, thank you.
We had allowed 30 minutes for your presentation and you took only 15 minutes. So
well, it's kind of you to offer me so much time.
Yes,
there's value in brevity.
Yes, I found it interesting, your comparison between academic, goals of the academic versus goals of the entrepreneur and measures of success and in the different things. And one of the things that I was thinking when you were saying that maybe the universities need to change some of the things because so much of our research, it takes a long time. I mean, my own dissertation topic, it took me 2 years to do, which is relatively slow. And I'm sure in many cases where an entrepreneur has to react very quickly. And I think of the things with AI, because it's only been, what, 2.5, 3 years that we had really AI came on the scene. And look at where we are today. I mean, it's gone so rapidly. But one of the things that when we look at it, the mission of universities have very definitely changed throughout the years. It really wasn't until, I mean, it was much later that an emphasis became on professions and actually doing things that would work together. That was after the scientific method came part of the university, because originally it was just not designed that way. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the idea of whether we need something other than a university, or should the university change, or is that the appropriate place to teach this entrepreneurship? I'd be curious.
I would say that it's a very important position, because it seems to me that what has happened is universities have pushed up the leading age from education. Originally it was 14 for my mother, 16 for when I left school, 18, and now to a degree with high levels of participation in higher education, it's moved up to 22. And that process of movement hasn't been quite followed by the changing nature of what education in universities offer. I think when I look back, most of the courses that were current when I actually stopped being an academic in '83, and when I went to university, were aimed at, in the UK, at colonial interests, possibly in America against another set of values. And I think that the values in terms of entrepreneurship and putting technology in to solve many of the current problems that we've caused ourselves have not quite caught up. And so I think that because knowledge moves so fast, education programs for undergraduates could be shorter, with more industrial involvement. And then it brings into question the research degree at 3 years. There needs to be a change in the structure of research degrees, because they have to be an individual's own work. And in being an individual's own work, they can't really get involved in teams. They can't really do leadership courses, which are important in developing some of the skills. So how do you round out the PhD degree into something that has social value as well as individual value, and can drive the education system forward into a new generation? Because if it doesn't, people will start to think, well, university is not so useful for me. And in actual fact, going back to when I was a student, some of the people that dropped out in the first year, electronics and electrical engineering, went into business straight off. They were straight in building music systems. And I think that ability for them to move in and out of the system has great value, and will help change the system to drive innovation more effectively.
I'm curious if anyone who's happened to be listening in has any questions or comments that they would like to make on this. Because I'd always had a question of whether or not one could teach entrepreneurship.
I have a question.
Wonderful.
I would like that Professor Marco Pari would be so kind and expand the idea of the companies would have office in the campus. How you would envision that? Because that sounds very cool.
Well, it's an idea that I only have been thinking about for about a month. In writing this presentation, I concluded that it would be a good, useful thing to do, because at the moment, just to put it in a geographic sense, I was responsible as an academic for an academic career, and then I moved to create a science park on adjacent land. But the academics were always rather reticent about going to see the companies. And it struck me a better way of doing it would be to put the companies onto the campus. So if you put in some workspace on the campus, in departments like, for example, our People AI program, and then you invited companies to participate in exploratory work on the campus in a less commercial environment, but still a commercial thrust in the idea of the individuals sitting on the campus. And I suspect that some of the first universities that will do it will be in America, because I think that they have much more of a flexible approach to education. But I may be wrong. So I would imagine shared workspace on the campus to invite in companies. And you could also operate programs where you bring in people from large corporations to sit in teams within units on campus, with a view to using the skills of students to try and elaborate and push forward science. Obviously, IP is particularly critical question. I don't know if that's has any resonance with you, but it's an idea.
Yeah, I like it very much, and I would suggest, if it would be okay, that somewhere in next week I would send you an email and do an email with our department head in XAMP here in Finland, because we are trying to develop some kind of concept of stimulate the companies to get more inside the university, and then we could brainstorm around
Sure.
that.
I'd be pleased to
Is
do
it
that.
okay? Are you allowing me that I do this thing?
I am. Yep. No problem.
Okay, thank you.
It'd be a
I'm
pleasure.
sorry
Very
to
good.
take time of your
No.
presentation, Professor.
Now, does anyone else have a question? One of the things that I would like to add, at my former university, we had a senior experience requirement of all of our business graduates. And in teams, they had to work on an actual business project. And this was during their last term of their senior year. And this resulted in a presentation to the company, et cetera, and then the senior experience celebration. And this was an attempt by my university to bring together the businesses and the students working together. We also have a team of executive mentors, a team of I think there's almost 50 of them now, who are executive mentors who work with the students who work on their soft skills as well. And I think this is, again, another attempt to do it.
It seems that you have taken a leap forward already.
Well, I think that one of the things that one of our more recent deans had been an entrepreneur, very successful, sold his company for several million, and then became the dean of the School of Business. He did have a PhD, by the way, in engineering. Sure. And so therefore had many business contacts and felt that we needed to get better integration with the local business community. So was very effective in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we are now at just about time for Agnes, and I see that you are here.
I sure am.
Okay, and let's see. You are from Sweden, and you're director of innovation at 360 Group. Okay.
Yes, and more recently, I run a boutique consultancy called Rhubarbs. We have been working very much with innovation departments before, and have the last year worked more and more with R&D teams. So I'm gonna pick up where Malcolm Perry took off, talking about the differences between the entrepreneurial drive and the research drive, and share a little bit about my learnings from the last year in that space, and what the borderland between innovation and research and development.
Look forward to listening. You do have 30 minutes till 12:30, so I think you should take as much time as you have. You have your slides, do you?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's see here.